Well, ka nui te mihi ki e koutou, kia ora, good morning everybody. Ka mihi ki te mana whenua ko Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. It's great to be here. Can I just say a big thank you to Fran and Simon for inviting me here, and importantly, for your great leadership of this forum over now several years. We really do appreciate it. Also, just want to acknowledge David Gerenbach, Deputy Chief of Mission from the US Embassy. Thank you for the work that you're doing each and every day to advance this really important relationship. And I also want to acknowledge Jonathan Mason and also Mike Hearn for the work that you're doing on our end as well. And it is great to see, without doubt, the hardest working Trade Minister we've seen for a while in Todd McClay. Todd, I want to say thanks for all the work that you're doing, mate. He's doing exactly what I asked him to do, which is to be on planes 365 days a year out there hustling in the world. And happy birthday, mate. We appreciate you. And also to all of the parliamentary colleagues, it's great to see Damien and David and Barbara here. And of course, Dame Panya in the house is always a treat as well. So good to see you too. Look, one of the things that really excites me most about the US is the extraordinary well of energy and also innovation that exists in the American business community. You know, and that energy and that innovation is something that I passionately believe that we can tap a lot more into. So ladies and gentlemen, can I say thank you for coming along this morning. I intend to talk first about the role of the US in the world, and second, what my government is doing to re-energise our relationship with Washington DC. And then I know Fran wants to ask some questions, which we'll look forward to getting into. Look, I want to speak quite candidly about the vital role that the US plays in the world, and there are a few countries that matter more to our security in New Zealand and also to our prosperity. In a world that is certainly more contested and more complicated, New Zealand's interests are best served by an America that is strongly engaged, a world where the US acts as a force of stability, a world where the US economy, which accounts for over a quarter of the world's GDP, continues to act as an engine room for growth, and a world where the US acts as the standard bearer for democratic institutions, for the rule of law and the power of markets. And perhaps because we are living in more benign times, previous New Zealand governments have not said enough, I think, about the importance of the stabilising security role of the US in the Indo-Pacific region. And during my travels this year, I've seen the US furnishing security on several occasions. It was starkly apparent to me when I visited Korea in the demilitarised zone, accompanied by an American general who commands tens of thousands of US soldiers, sailors and aviators in South Korea. And on one side of the DMZ is one of the world's poorest countries, a country organised to serve its autocratic leadership's ambitions. And then on the other side of the Korean border, where I stood, there's a thriving democracy in South Korea, which is now the world's 14th largest economy, the home of world-beating technology firms and the source of a cultural phenomenon called K-pop, which you might well listen to, many of you in this room. But the difference, couldn't be more marked. And it was a salutary reminder, frankly, that South Korea would not be the vibrant economy that it is today were it not for the security partnerships on the Korean Peninsula, and something that has been enabled by American forces. So supported by other countries too, including New Zealand, but heavily outnumbered by our US friends. And my visit to the DMZ between North and South Korea in September was a clear illustration that there is no prosperity without security. A stable and a peaceful Indo-Pacific is not just in the interests of the US and New Zealand. Security is also in your interests as businesses. Our exporters depend on safe and secure trade lanes, and your companies succeed best when economies are growing rather than fretting and worrying about instability. In contrast, you see Russia's illegal war in the Ukraine, now supported by North Korean munitions and now also North Korean troops on the front line, is an example where a conflict has actually caused higher inflation. Think about energy prices in Western Europe, grain prices throughout Africa, rice prices throughout Southeast Asia, and significant economic suffering has resulted because of that conflict and because of that instability. And that's why I keep saying that actually our economic prosperity and our security and stability in the region are actually inextricably linked. So I'd say with many old certainties shifting, the United States remains an indispensable economic partner. America is an extraordinary economic machine, and having lived there for 6 years, and many of you here having done business there, you know what I mean. It remains the world's largest economy by quite some distance, and it is an exceptional source of ideas, innovation and investment. And those who know me will know there is little that energises me more than the vibrancy and the inventiveness of American businesses, with US firms now some of our largest sources of foreign direct investment. And those businesses, I think, are injecting real vibrancy into our New Zealand economy. Whether it's building data centres, as Microsoft has done here in Auckland, Hollywood studios, whose productions have created the ecosystem around our own film industry, or West Coast venture capitalists enabling frontier firms like Sir Peter Beck's Rocket Lab to do extraordinary things on the Mahia Peninsula, or even iconic American firms like McDonald's that were responsible for many of our first jobs, including mine here in New Zealand. Good to see Donald Trump going to McDonald's too recently. I think he took an idea out of my page, actually. Anyway, American businesses are integral to our society and the functioning of our economy, and they are generating prosperity for us here in New Zealand and paying dividends for America too. Now I want to focus a little bit on our government's ambitions for the US relationship. And you will no doubt have all been waiting for me to comment on the US election and what it means to New Zealand. And the bottom line is that our relationship is strong, it's enduring, and it's going to continue to be so, irrespective of changing administrations. And I do have the greatest of respect for the Biden administration's achievements. At APEC, I had the chance to thank the President for 50 years of public service and leadership, and the contribution that I think he made, certainly in Northeast Asia and certainly within the Indo-Pacific region, having the US engage more deeply. I was also delighted to speak to President-elect Trump 10 days ago now, and what came through loud and clear in that call, again, was his fondness for New Zealand, and we spoke about world affairs, and we also discussed how we continue to deepen the relationship and the foundations of our relationship between our two great countries. So frankly, whoever is in office, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, my government's job is to pursue New Zealand's national interests and to fully harness what our two countries can offer and work together on to ensure that the relationship is at the very best it possibly can be. So you can expect my government to continue to bring action and urgency across the three interconnected lines of effort with the US. The first is growing both countries' prosperity. The second is actually strengthening our security. And thirdly, it's deepening our relationship. And I just want to take each of those three components of the relationship in turn. The first is the US sort of recently eclipsed Australia to become our second largest export market. And it is growing exceptionally well. To give you a feel for it, two-way trade is now 36% higher this year than before the pandemic. And with a trend towards value over volume, we offer American exporters open access to our market, with the main driver of growth in our exports being the strength and relative openness of their economy. Our primary sector remains a mainstay, with nearly $6 billion of safe, sustainable and premium agricultural products sold, exports that often complement US agricultural producers. And what we have seen, which is incredibly exciting, is a massive growth in services trade, with tourism and tech and recreation now a very big growth engine. As a company like Rocket Lab illustrates, the US is also a rapidly growing market for Kiwi entrepreneurs that specialise in technology and other innovative exports. And our products support a range of critical US supply chains and now also US jobs. My government's going to continue to work with colleagues in DC to sustain that trade and, where possible, to increase it by tackling the non-tariff barriers that snarl up exporters' trade, and we will also work with the administration to build our economic security agenda. I am really determined that we attract more quality US foreign direct investment. The US is already our third largest investment partner, but my government will improve our regulatory settings to attract more US investment, and we are pitching directly to American investors. When I was in the US in July, I met with a series of them. I do that every country I go to. I sit down for 2 hours with potential investors and take them through the story of New Zealand and hear from them their perspective about what we need to do to encourage more inbound investment. And I also intend to bring a select group of investors to New Zealand in early 2025 to showcase what we have to offer and what investable products and asset classes are going to be available in New Zealand. We need foreign direct investment, as you all know. We are suffering by not actually having enough capital and pools of capital, and part of that is actually accessing a lot of that investment that sits offshore, is looking for a home, wants to invest in New Zealand. We want that investment for public infrastructure and also to get the transfer knowledge between our best firms in New Zealand with international globally frontiered firms. And in order to do that, we've got to be able to set up the deal sheet, basically, that connects those two things. As I said earlier, there can't be any prosperity without security, and besides Australia, the US is our most important defence and security partner. And we benefit from that partnership, whether it's the US's role in supporting a stable Indo-Pacific, whether it's about sharing intelligence or busting organised criminal gangs that prey on our communities. And New Zealand too is an active partner making a difference for our friends in Washington DC. New Zealand personnel join the US in operations and exercises from the Middle East all through to the Indo-Pacific. I talked earlier about what we do on the Korean Peninsula. We also cooperate with the US and other partners to uphold the freedom of navigation, whether it's in the Red Sea or in the South China Sea. And these are freedoms that are really crucial for ensuring that New Zealand's trade can flow unimpeded. And our joint membership of the Five Eyes directly contributes to protecting New Zealand's national security interests. New Zealand welcomes the step up of the US and its commitment to the Pacific too, and we're going to continue to work with DC as a constructive partner for our region. And New Zealand must also remain a credible strategic partner, and that's why my government is undertaking a defence capability plan, one that ensures that our New Zealand Defence Force is actually fit for purpose and builds on its capability so it's set up for tomorrow. And that is going to take some money, and we all know the economic situation and environment is challenging. And so the government needs to be even more thoughtful, more intentional as we think about where our defence capabilities will sit in the future and what is in that plan. So in the coming months, we will announce our capability priority out to 2040. With the Trump administration coming to power, you can and you should expect us to be investing in building connections, and actually deepening our relationship is so important. Indeed, that is very much our focus. In addition to talking with the President-elect last week, I used my July visit to actually spend time building connections with influential Republicans and also Democrats on the Hill and elsewhere in DC. I know Winston Peters has been doing the same as the new administration unfolds. Todd's been doing likewise, and other ministers are continuing to build partnership and connection with their counterparts too. And I'll just say, having lived there for 6 years, the US political system is wide and deep, and it's important that we build relationships at a state level, certainly in the House, certainly in the Senate, certainly with the presidency, but we can't just rely on the leader-to-leader connection, as important as they are. It's a big, broad system, and it's important we engage on multiple levels and have relationships across the piece. I know how important those relationships are. Those relationships actually enable us to find new areas of opportunity, and they also create the bandwidth to deal with inevitable areas of disagreement too. And there will always be areas of difference between Wellington and Washington DC, regardless who occupies the White House. Just as we have things which we don't see eye to eye with on Australia, the same is true with the US. And these are differences, though, that I think are dwarfed by our common interests, and so the relationships we build will enable us to manage those differences sensibly. I think New Zealanders feel they know the US well, and whether through tourism or media or popular culture, sports, business or education. But after having lived and worked there for many years, I worry that New Zealanders often assume too much about America. It's imperative that our emerging and our future leaders, our entrepreneurs, our scientists, Māori and people from other walks of life familiarise themselves with what the United States is really about. When you think about it, it's actually a young country with one of the fastest growing populations in the OECD. And it's not a monolithic Americana. It's actually a place that's layered with subcultures and subgeographies. A population the same size as Western Europe, and you could argue the same diversity within it as well. It is becoming more ethnically diverse, with the population of a state like California now 40% Hispanic. And even while you think about states on the East Coast that are predominantly very white. This is a country where the average resident of Mississippi earns significantly less than half as much as the average New Yorker. And so there is a huge amount of diversity that sits within the US that we need to understand as New Zealand businesses, because we just need to tap into those niches and we can do incredibly well for ourselves in a big market like that. And in a similar vein, we also need to increase the number of influential leaders in the US who know New Zealand better and understand us better and our priorities too. So, ladies and gentlemen, my government's focus continues to be on growing New Zealand's economy and easing the cost of living. That doesn't happen by looking inward, and the strength of the New Zealand economy depends on the success of our world-leading goods and services exporters, and many of you are certainly here in the room today. And access to foreign markets remains the key to growing our exports, and yet the environment in which we operate in today is certainly much more turbulent than it has been, I think, for the past 30 years. We see that enthusiasm for trade liberalisation has waned. We see that efficiency is giving way to caution and resilience and, sadly, protectionism. And we see global stability and security underpinned by international law is starting to fray. And New Zealand is not unique, actually, in wrestling with those challenges, and working with our friends and our partners is key to protect and to promote our common interests. And I am passionate about the US, but through our foreign policy reset, we are also bringing new energy and new activism to all of our partnerships in other parts of the Indo-Pacific region too, whether that be in Southeast Asia, Japan or India. These are all consequential relations for our security and for our prosperity too. And I have to say, so too is China. President Xi and I agreed last week on the importance of sustaining what is already a very strong New Zealand-China relationship. One on where we can cooperate and capitalise in areas like trade and climate and people-to-people connections, but one where we also don't shy away, actually, from our areas of difference, and we will continue to discuss those areas of difference in a very predictable, consistent way, publicly or privately. So today's focus is the US, which is and will remain a very critical relationship for New Zealand. My government is primed, we're excited, and we're ready to work with the incoming US administration to create the opportunities for both of our countries to be able to benefit. To build the stability, to build the resilience in our region and in our economies, we need to safeguard our people and our prosperity and also our freedom of action. So again, I know I'm looking forward to that work, and that's the work that the government wants to get into in a big way. And a pretty exciting future exists for New Zealand, I have to tell you, in general. Don't ever give up on New Zealand or New Zealanders, because when you think about the opportunities we have, they are immense. And I've been in this job now for 12 months, and I can tell you I am really optimistic about our future. There is no reason why we can't build the best small advanced economy and country on earth, period. And that is because we sit bang smack in the middle of this most exciting region called the Indo-Pacific. Yes, there are tensions, and yes, when you look around democracies around the world, there are big tensions and polarisation within those countries, but we have strong democratic and social institutions. We have abundant natural resources, and most importantly, we have the most incredible, innovative, talented people. And what we want to see is more ambition, more aspiration, more positivity, more can-do as we hustle and get our mojo moving internationally as well. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for caring about this relationship. Fran, I look forward to the questions.
Oh, yeah. Why not sit there? I have to peer over so I can see there. Prime Minister, you talked about the conversation with Donald Trump. How did you find him?
Oh, look, actually very friendly, and he knew New Zealand well. He knew of my background of coming from outside of politics and from a world of business, and he also knew about our government and what we were doing as well. So I was very fortunate because he made the effort in what's a very busy time for an incoming US government. Some of you may not be aware, but between now and when they win an election and when they take office on January the 20th, there's about 4,500 political appointments you have to make. So we have an impartial public service, which I think is a good thing, but in the American system, key appointments are made by the president coming in. So for him to take time out of that schedule to reach out to New Zealand, which is certainly a small country in the scheme of how they look at us, was really special.
What will you build from that conversation?
Well, I think it's about making sure we talked a lot about the role of the US in the Indo-Pacific. I think, as I said, President Biden's legacy, as I said to him, had been working with Japan and Korea and Northeast Asia particularly, but also within the Pacific Islands and engaging. We spoke about the importance of continuing that. We did talk about the challenges in our respective economies and also obviously the idea to want to continue to build out greater economic relationship as well. But I just thought it was a very warm conversation. He was aware of New Zealand, he knew about our government, and I just think we've got an opportunity also to position New Zealand well and to actually create the opportunities for many of the people in the room to continue to build the business in the US.
Did he know much about you personally, bearing in mind Elon Musk actually gave you quite a good advertisement on X?
Yes, he was aware of my background and that I'd lived in the US and that I'd come from a business world and outside politics as well. Yep.
So substantively, initiatives likely to flow from that?
Yeah, look, I mean, as I said before, the system is so big and it's so large, and many of you who know the US well, and I lived in Illinois for 6 years, essentially, and bits of New York, it's just got such an inertia and such a momentum. And for New Zealand firms, the real opportunity is you have to find the niches, of consumers. You have to find the points of distribution. You can cut. I remember going to the US from London and picking up a business, and we were number 4 in the market. And I remember just chopping the country up and saying, I want to be number 1 at Walmart, where Greg was, and I'm just going to focus on building a business with Walmart. And that was 1/3 of the market. And then once we got to number 1 in the Walmart, then we opened it up to Costco and to CVS and all the other distributors. Then we recut the market and said, well, we're not number 1 actually in the south west, and we're not number 1 in the northeast. And so we focused on geographic energy at that point. And then we worked out we weren't number 1 with African Americans and Hispanics. So right, let's go build our business around those markets. So you can keep chopping up a very large market like that. And for New Zealand businesses here, you don't need much. You just need to tap into that wealth that sits there that actually is largely recession-proof, that can actually roll through the economic cycles incredibly well. We did something when I was at Air New Zealand, which coming out of the GFC, where we just focused on, the upper middle consumer and found those niches in certain states and then connected them. We didn't need much to make our business work incredibly well.
We have a lot of export interests in the room. I think it's fair to say we expect the United States to retreat, ignore the rules-based system, and operate from a separate playbook, judging by prior election comments. Do you expect that to change?
Well, look, I think it was interesting. I've just come back from APEC, was on Peru in the weekend, and I think when you look at the US, China, and Russia, over the last 5 years or so, actually there has been rising levels of protectionism, and APEC was set up with advancing trade liberalisation and the international rules-based law of trade, and so that's the reality of what's been happening in the world. Having said that, we've had a Democratic administration or Republican administration neither want to join CPTP or do free trade agreements for political domestic reasons, which both parties are aligned around. And yet we have still been able to find a way as New Zealand, because of that market I just talked about, where our trade is up 35 to 38%. And importantly, our actual services businesses are really exploding in the US. If you think about tech and space and the areas where we want to be putting a lot more focus on software, it's been fantastic to see 38% growth in the last year, for example. So I think, yes, we've got to keep working and advocating for the international rules-based trade system, which we keep doing and making the case with. Countries like Singapore and ourselves are working together with countries like Chile on new initiatives we're trying to land into APEC. But also, it's a big market regardless, frankly, of who is president, that you should be able to convert and be able to build great businesses in.
The elephant in the room is tariffs, though, and that is, potentially 20%. The new Commerce Secretary-elect has made a range of comments talking about China. Don't tax our people, make money instead, put tariffs on China, 400 billion. If you did the same arithmetic about New Zealand, you could be talking about 900 million. So that's a big chunk of change. So what are you going to do to kind of navigate through an area where export interests are justifiably a little bit concerned?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric, obviously, in the campaign, and I think we need to honestly, probably not need to wait and see a little bit as to what actually does get implemented around the tariffs proposal and policy. Again, you will have all seen numbers that suggest, and there's lots of estimates around there, but it's just over, I think, a 1% hit to the US economy if they were to do it. In New Zealand, it's actually an order of magnitude much, much less, if you look at some of the maths. And again, it just depends upon what they decide to do, and I just think you've got to separate some of the campaign, let them actually form a government, actually see what does emerge. But I'd just say in that context, that's where for all of you in the room, your relationships matter, your business strategies and the clarity of your strategy really matters. It's a time for you to get head down and actually deepen up your connections into the US as well, because irrespective of whatever happens, if anything happens. As I keep saying, I mean, having lived there, you're living in a market of 360 million people. It's incredibly wealthy, it's growing, it's incredibly dynamic. And so I would just ask us to get into that growth mindset and get on the front foot and see opportunity irrespective, because actually it'll be about our relative competitiveness if there was a tariff regime applied across all countries around the world, whether it's a high rate and a low rate as has been talked about. The reality is it's common to everybody. So then it's about the relative competitiveness of your business still relative to your competitors. So, yep, I get it. But I think, we shouldn't be looking for excuses. We need to get on the front foot and go smack it and be very, very assertive and very, very aggressive in growing businesses in the relationship with the US, irrespective of what the trade regime does look like.
Just to qualify what I said earlier, the same gentleman has also suggested that there be an element of the bargaining chip there as well to get some mutual benefit. So potentially a negotiating club or something a bit more surgical.
Yes, yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of hypotheses and speculation, which I won't get into, but that's why, frankly, it is my job and the government's job to make sure that we have good, deep, broad relationships across the political system. We will continue to argue for trade liberalisation, the absence of protectionism, advocating, as a small trading nation in the world, our values. We'll do that at the macro level, but at the micro level, there's just let's get on and get the business done too.
Before I go to questions from the floor, if you can just give us a little bit more detail about how you will balance the interests, the economic interests with China, whereas the political security one with the United States, because it would seem to be much more contested.
Yeah, look, it was an interesting 4 or 5 days because I spoke with President-elect Trump and I spoke with President Xi and I spoke with President Biden all within that period of time. President Xi and I agree, look, we've got a strong relationship and we are going to continue to collaborate and to expand trade opportunities that exist. You think about primary industries, as I said, climate, think about people-to-people connections, education, tourism, all that good stuff. There is still a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of people that go on about China and it's slowing down, but actually an $18 trillion economy growing at 5% is still an opportunity. So we will continue to do that. But we've also been very clear, and I've been clear with President Xi and also Premier Li, that we will cooperate where we can and continue to develop and build the relationship out. But we also have differences, and we have differences in our values and our political histories and systems. And inevitably, we should be able to, as successive governments frankly have in New Zealand, predictably and consistently raise those differences publicly or privately. And so where we see foreign interference, with Chinese attack on our parliamentary security systems, we'll call that out publicly. And so by being clear with the Chinese about, we still see huge opportunity in China for us and for New Zealand. We also see huge opportunity in Indo-Pacific where we've been under-trading with some of these countries and there's more opportunity. But there's also acknowledging we have differences. And that's just the maturity, I think, of a relationship that's been around for 50 years. In the same way we will have differences with the US on trade policy, macro trade policy. We have differences with the Australia on 501s and we continue to, that's natural, it's just my job and our government's job is to make sure we're acting in New Zealand's national interests in an economic and a security sense, and I think we can continue to do both.
Just before we do go to these questions, which are interesting, rough sketches what your diary looks like next year with all these trips that you're now starting to talk about. You've talked about China, you've had the invitation, you've talked about India. Seems pretty full, the agenda. Yeah, look,
it's been important in the first year to actually lift the urgency and the intensity of the relationships and to build on what has been established before. So we meet as a foursome, which is myself and Winston and Todd and Judith, as the 4 ministers that are accountable for lifting that intensity. And if you think about it, this year has been about getting those relationships in place, me establishing leader-to-leader relationships with lots of new presidents and prime ministers around the region. And that's important because each of those leaders has a different personality. If I can get New Zealand, we don't have share of wallet, but we have share of mind. If I can get us positioned in the right place so that they are thinking about New Zealand, they like us, but sometimes it's about building our relevancy and thinking about what we bring to the party as well, and making the case for that. So that's been important in the first year. Next year, certainly a big focus in the first quarter probably will be around India. And the reason's very simple, is that we have worked assiduously in the last year to try and build that rapport. Todd's met with the Trade Minister 6 times now. Winston's been there, I think, twice. Judith's gone there once. We hosted the Indian President here. I've met with Modi and spoken with him twice in person and on the phone. We've had a number of good connections with him, and then he's very kindly invited me to India in the first quarter of next year. So we will take a big delegation because I want people to get turned on to India too. It's $2.8 billion worth of trade. In fact, it sort of went backwards over the last 6 years. It's very, very tiny. If you think about China, similar sized population, almost at 40 billion two-way trade. Difficult market, again, a market I know well from my Unilever days, but I think there is an opportunity in that relationship that's been established. That was our job this year, is to build a relationship at several levels. So that creates the conditions for conversations around trade and other things that we want to move forward with. And then China, second quarter. Yeah. And again, hosting Premier Lee here was important. Connecting with President Xi at APEC one-on-one was very good as well. And we've had some series of high-level engagements too.
United States?
US will try and work that through as well at some point, but it will just depend on, we'll let the administration sort of settle. And I said to President Trump, he's more than welcome here anytime, and he said likewise, he's looking forward to catching up several times too.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about a knowledge economy, getting more investment into New Zealand, and our companies. You cited a number which have done exceptionally well, particularly Rocket Lab and others. Question here, anonymous. Einstein said that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. How will New Zealand invest into a knowledge society that strengthens innovation with the United States? Yeah,
great question. So look, we've got 2 economic challenges at the moment. The first is we've got to deal with this cost of living, and we've got to get the financial discipline and sort of relearn the lessons of economics from 35 years ago. Control spending so that you control inflation, get interest rates low, so you can grow the economy, keep people in jobs. And that's sort of the clean-up job that we've been working through over the course of this year, and it's going to be a bit turbulent, but we've still got work to do there. But the really exciting work is actually when you step back and say, over the last 30 years under successive governments, we've had an economic productivity disease, I'd call it. And despite how hard Kiwis are working, we've been unable to create enough value in the economy to transform the standard of living. And when you look at other small advanced economies, which I've probably studied for 30 years, and you say, how have they become more productive? It boils back down to world-class education system, embracing more science, technology, innovation, modern, reliable infrastructure, red tape ease of doing business, and strong international connections for export, but also for inbound investment. So with respect to the investment becomes quite critical for the knowledge-based economy, because if you look at New Zealand's domestic companies, the bottom 10% and versus the top 10% of New Zealand firms, the top 10% are 7 times more productive than the bottom 10%. And then if you go look at the globally frontiered multinational firms that exist around the world and compare them to New Zealand's top 10%, there's a big difference in knowledge there. So we have to get the investment settings right for attracting foreign direct investment to New Zealand that can partner with our private companies and get the knowledge transfer across, but also the capital across. And we also
tax incentives part of that?
Well, you can look at that. I mean, I think initially for us, it's we're also very interested in attracting the sovereign wealth funds and the pension funds, of which there is a world awash with cash, and we haven't got our fair share of it. You know, we are 38th out of 38th in the OECD now at attracting foreign direct investment, and so that's why everywhere I go, when I was in the US, I met up with Larry Fink and Ben Horowitz and a whole bunch of guys, because we want them to bring their money here, and they're actually open for bringing money to New Zealand, and when they've come through New Zealand, they just haven't always found things to invest in. We have a government that wants that investment for public infrastructure and partnership, but also for private companies. And so I think you've got these 2 bits where we're open for their investment, they want to invest, and we actually have to help educate and actually do that middleware of actually here's the deal sheet of what is available in this country and what we're open to doing. And that's why I said earlier I'd like to think about how I can attract global investors to New Zealand early next year to sort of make them very aware of that.
Is that for an investment summit?
Something like that, yep.
Okay. One other question here from David Wyborn. Will the government be reviewing the migrant investor program to allow a return to more international investment in New Zealand, particularly from the US?
Yeah, we will. I mean, at the moment, for Erica and immigration, her real focus has been on the accredited work visa program and getting that setting right for this year. And she's got a bit more work to do in that space. So we will continue to look at that. And that's an important part of it. Obviously, getting our overseas investment settings right is really critical. You and I have talked about this before, but it's very interesting to me. I think the mindset for investment in New Zealand has been, it's a privilege to invest in New Zealand. You now have to prove to us why we should take your money in this country. And I think it's very interesting. You rock into Ireland and they've changed that mindset, and it's a positive one, which is thank you for coming to Ireland. Thank you for bringing your money here. We really appreciate you. I'm Chris. I'm your account manager. If there's anything you need, here's my business card. Here's a piece of land that's resource consented that you can build your $50 to $100 million pet food company on if you wish. Here's a building that you could join and take a floor of office space there. And here are the 5 new contacts that are adjacent to you that you need to know. Let me make those connections for you. That's a different mindset around welcoming investment to a country versus the hoops that we make investors go through here in New Zealand. And we shouldn't be fearful about actually getting those settings right, getting clarity on the 30-year pipeline of infrastructure investment, and helping facilitate that investment.
You mentioned earlier, Prime Minister, the Defence Capability Review, which you expect early next year. Do you expect the United States to insist on defence expenditure of 2%? By New Zealand, as has been the case with Europe, and how could we afford it?
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt about it. We're in really challenging economic times. We know we want to spend more on defence, and we need to do that. And actually, defence expenditure has just got, geometrically expensive for everyone around the world. The first thing, as I've been saying to everybody internationally, is that we have just replaced our heads of all the forces, the new Chief of Staff, we've got a new Secretary of Defence, we've got a new Minister, obviously, and the question with that new leadership team is I want to hold them accountable for building out a defence strategy that is not sort of random of let's go off and buy a piece of kit here that's very expensive and a one-off and sort of build out MOTAT of sort of having one of every type of aircraft and defence assets. Let's actually stop and take a step back and go back to grassroots and say, what is it that New Zealand actually can do really well? What do we have to face up to and say that's an area what we can and can't do? And when you're a small country with real challenges around budgets, and we will need to spend more on defence, and we were spent more actually in the budget 2024 this year as well, we have to be more choiceful, more intentional about where is our edge and our point of differentiation going to be in the defence assets and capability, and how does it plug in, particularly with Australia, where we want to see increasing interoperability. There's no point us boiling the ocean and trying to do everything in defence. We have to make choices and trade-offs as a result. And so that's a process of strategy rather than tactics of just buying kit. We need to make sure that it's linked to what we think we need going forward. So that defence capability plan is already in process. I want the new leadership team to own it, and then I want to hold them accountable over the coming years that as we tip more money in, we know we're putting good money into a good strategy, not just into capital expenditure.
Yeah, you had built a reasonably strong relationship with Kurt Campbell, who will be retiring as US Deputy Secretary of State. He's been fairly vocal in Australia in recent days about the need for Australia and the United States and also New Zealand being focused on China. Where do we sit on AUKUS now with the change? Do you think that will make any difference to the parameters of what you've been discussing as a government?
Well, look, I mean, firstly, Kurt's done an exceptionally good job partnering with governments of all flavours in New Zealand, and he's been a great advocate of New Zealand. We really want to thank him for his service because he's been critical in our relationship and I think given us disproportionate attention and advocacy as well. Again, for me, it's just coming back to our core defence capability plan under new leadership, getting very precise in a New Zealand point of view as to what we want to do with our own defence capabilities. As with respect to AUKUS Pillar 2, there really hasn't been a lot of progress since the Labour government. Also, our positions are the same. We're in the exploration phase. There's no commitment, and there hasn't, to be honest, it's going quite slowly with officials still at that level. So, you've also had change of leadership in the AUKUS countries as well with Keir Starmer and Anthony Albanese, and now with Trump coming in. We engage with them, but we're open to exploring it. There's nothing further or no new development from before the election, frankly.
We have another question. Prioritising New Zealand's sustainability investment is critical for market access to consumers to the US and for attracting US investment here. Are we doing enough?
Yeah, look, I think we are. You've got Simon Watts up at Baku at the moment, working with the Singaporeans on carbon markets, co-chairing that piece of work, and it's gone very well. Some of the other pillars have actually, been very challenged at this COP. We've also working with, an APEC, and we talked about with Singapore and Chile, working on more green investment partnership work as well, and actually thinking about can we, in the same way we kicked off CPTPP, is there new innovation as small countries that actually we can try and perfect a model or a pilot that actually ends up roping in some other countries into it. And, frankly, irrespective of what the new administration thinks about Paris, we are deeply committed to our 2050 net zero goals. So, and you look at our emissions budget 1, emissions budget 2, we're on track, which is the legal mechanisms by which we make sure we're on that pathway. There's always more to do, as we think about emissions budget 3, which is 2030 to 35. There's a lot more work for us to do to get to where we need to get to, but, we continue to move that forward. So, and I think, we look at carbon markets, there's lots of innovation that could be done in that space. Again, we're working with Singapore in that space. Look, it's important. And we've got a great positioning in New Zealand. I just would say to many in the room, and it's a message I've sort of given when I've been on delegations, is I feel often, metaphorically, we focus on the marketing and the opportunity is to do the sales. It's great to go off on these delegations into these markets, do the relationship building, all of that good stuff, and it's great and to position New Zealand positively out in the world. We've got to do that job. But now the time is to convert all of that into real dollars that we get back home into our businesses. So, we need to build out, like you see in Denmark and Ireland, big global internationally frontiered firms from New Zealand. We've probably got 2 or 3 of them, but we need 25 of them ultimately. And so now is the time to do the business and to convert. And I think that requires a lot more knowledge about how markets are structured within each of the countries, particularly the US is complex, knowing where your margin structure is, knowing which distribution channels you want to be in, which consumer segments you're going after. You need more clarity and understanding of those niches to build out the business, to convert. The lovely feeling that we get when we go off building these relationships, that's great, but we've actually got to now do the business and convert it.
Yeah, just tangentially to that, what settings is the government prepared to change to help attract more US investment to achieve?
Yeah, so we're doing some work, which I've asked David Seymour to lead around the overseas investment settings. There's certainly, we want to build out a 30-year pipeline, not just of ideas, but a proper pipeline of infrastructure projects. I took Shane Jones, Chris Bishop and Simeon Brown to New South Wales. I wanted them to see how infrastructure in New South Wales is set up. Because as David and Damien will know, when we change our political cycles, we shouldn't be changing our infrastructure plan. We want to have more bipartisanship around that, and the priority of critical infrastructure should be quite well and independently established, in my view. And then it's a question of how much cash we've got and how we're funding and financing it that determines how much through that list we get to do. But each time a new government comes in, a road gets turned off, a road gets turned on. Well, that's a pretty basic sort of thing that most developed economies around the world can continue to build roads, whether it's Cambridge to Pieri or just basic tasks. So I think we need to get 30-year pipeline. That's a proper pipeline. We need to think about an independent sort of infrastructure management. We need to have a national infrastructure agency that connects the funding and financing mechanisms for public-private partnerships, which we want to embrace where it's appropriate for the right kind of infrastructure investment. And then we need to get the overseas investment settings correct to attract that investment here. Part of it is when you sit down with the investors, they say, look, I love New Zealand. It's small. I've got 195 other countries I could invest in where there's 8 billion people in. And it's difficult to get things done. And that's where the fast-track consenting, I think, actually getting things built, because they just move the capital off to Indonesia or Thailand if you're a big fund. And we haven't been getting our fair share, I think, of those pension funds that exist around the world, which we've got to be able to do.
And the fifth regime?
The what?
Fifth regime.
Fifth.
F-I-F. Fifth.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I can't remember.
With respect, yes, no, there's work there to do as well. So, yeah, and that's underway.
Did I say fifth? Okay. You have been lobbied on that.
Yes, no, and fully understand that. And I think, that's an obvious setting for us to adjust. Yeah.
Okay. Another question here about where do you see and what levers to grow the economy and reduce the flow of talented Kiwis to Australia?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, look, in New Zealand's history and our political and economic cycles, we've seen inflows and outflows of Kiwis from New Zealand. You know, we all, as New Zealanders, there's always been that journey of overseas, and that's, you know, we've got 1 million of us overseas, 5 million in the country. You know, people like myself went overseas because there's big opportunities to work in big companies with big levers to learn lots of things that you end up bringing hopefully back to home. But I think that is exactly the challenge that we have, and that's why you've seen the government just focus on 3 very simple things. We have to rebuild the economy so that people can feel they work hard, they can get ahead. We have to make sure that people feel safe with their families living in New Zealand from a law and order crime point of view. And you've got to be able to believe that your education system for your kids is going to set you up well for a great future, and they're going to be world class and competitive with their same kids in Singapore and New South Wales and Canada. And we've got to make sure that the healthcare system is accessible for timely quality healthcare for your parents and for yourself. So that is the job of I think all governments, is to build out an opportunity society where young people say, hey, this is an awesome country. It's got momentum. I feel if I work hard, I can get ahead. My kids are going to get raised in a great place. I want to make a contribution to that community. So that is our job, is to build back, and make the case and expand on the economy, law and order, and the public service delivery pieces that we've been working on.
It's a perceptive question from Ebenezer Mohan. Given President Trump's renewed emphasis on expanding oil and gas drilling in the US, how does the New Zealand government plan to position its own oil and gas industry?
Yeah, look, good question. We want to end the oil and gas ban, as you know. That's a big focus for us. And we get the point about coming off fossil fuels, but personally, I don't think you just go end oil and gas exploration in New Zealand and don't think through the second and third order consequences of that. And we saw that this year, is my view. You know, we saw the record world wholesale electricity prices in a country that has abundant natural energy. So yes, we run at 85 to 87% renewable electricity. We want to double the amount of renewable electricity. In fact, after I leave you now, I'm jumping on a plane to go open up a new geothermal power plant, which will be fantastic. Another 3.5% of renewable capacity coming into our system. But fast track's another part of that. You know, we actually have 22 renewable projects that shouldn't take 8 years to do a wind farm. It should take 1 year. You should be able to build it in 2 years and power up 130,000 homes off the back of that very easily. So we've got to double the amount of renewables, but in the intervening period, we still need sources of gas, as you've seen this year, when we run into a very dry year, the worst we've had since 1992, and we have got no gas. We then cause wholesale electricity prices to go through the roof, and then you start to see plant closures at mills and other things. So energy security should not be a problem for New Zealand given the abundant natural resources, but that's why we're ending the oil and gas ban, knowing we've got to use gas for a period of time. Geothermal becomes very good for the base load. We'll continue to expand opportunities there, and we've got to double the amount of renewables, because it was interesting. I was in Sydney recently, and I remember thinking, I sat down, and they have got 2 data centres they want to build in the next 5 to 6 years. In order for those 2 data centres to come to life in the scale that they're planning, that is all of 100% of Sydney's electricity supply today that needs to be created. So it's a geometric increase of abundant, affordable electricity is what we need to flood New Zealand with. And so we should be ripping into it and doing anything and everything we can to get that renewable investment happening and taking place. And the other thing I'd say is there's been quite a lot of interest around in Malaysia and Indonesia and the Philippines around, say, our expertise in geothermal, and which we've had for 60 years or so. So I have a Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia coming down with a big trade delegation to understand our energy pieces so that we can think about, you know, investment in both sides together.
I'll take just 2 more questions and then we'll draw this to a close and hear from outgoing Ambassador Tom Udall. Just again, coming back to AUKUS, a question here: how should New Zealanders and NZ businesses think about this? Because most don't seem to know what it is.
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, under Labor, the previous Labor government, you know, our government, there is no change. We're just exploring the opportunities for whether New Zealand, is there an opportunity for New Zealand or not to get involved with AUKUS. As I said, that'll be informed very much by our defence capability plan as to where we want to build our edge and have points of differentiation in our defence capability. But as I said, this is going to take some time, so I wouldn't get too worked up about it. I would get on with the business of what you need to do, which is that is not an excuse for why your business doesn't need to run well. You've got to get out there and win customers and build culture and get your commercials straight. So, yeah.
This from Andrew. Have you read The Art of the Deal?
No.
Maybe you should.
It might be added to the 17 books over summer that I'm going to read, so hopefully.
But it says on a more serious note, how might we encourage the United States and President Trump to more actively promote democracy?
Yeah, look, as I said, I think we've observed several things. We've moved from a rules-based system to a power-based system. The move from rules to power, as we say, I think is quite real. And as a small country that has an important role to play, just because we're small doesn't mean we shouldn't show up and make contributions into the IP4, into NATO, into APEC, into the EAS, into ASEAN, as we've been doing over the course of the year. We believe in values. These are New Zealand values, not politically party values. They're New Zealand values, and we need to advocate for them. But you can't just talk about them. You actually have to follow the talk through with action as a result. And that's why if you believe in the sovereignty of nation states, if you believe in the international rules-based system, that does mean that we have tripled our personnel on the Korean Peninsula. We've doubled our resources looking at UN sanctions on North Korea, moving munitions into a Russia-Ukraine war. It does mean that we've participated in action against the Houthis because we are a free trading nation. We are a small country that believes we do well, and we've done well over 70 years under that system. So we will continue to make that case very strongly to all countries, as I did again even in APEC in my formal remarks amongst the 21 leaders. So New Zealand is a great country, and I know we've been through a tough time. But I don't want anyone in this room to give up on New Zealand or New Zealanders because, man, when you look at it, and I come back from every overseas trip, and I know many of you who come with me to feel the same, you just come back, man, it's a world of opportunity, and yes, there are challenges in the world, but they're happening to everybody. So it does come back to your relative competitiveness and your mindset about how we want to do and shape our future as New Zealanders out there in the world. We have a good reputation, but that opens a door, but then what are we going to do when we get through the door? We want to be world-class New Zealand, and that means for us stepping up all of our intensity in a business sense, in a political sense, to make sure we're making the most of the opportunities that are out there, because it's a pretty exciting world, and there's no reason, absolutely, I feel that 12 months into the job, why we can't build the best small country on earth, period. There should be no excuses. And so let's work together to get that job done as business community and government as well.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Before we farewell you, we're going to have a video very shortly from Ambassador Tom Udall, and I'm aware before he reflects on his period here, you would also like to reflect on his period here as well.
No, look, I just want to say thanks to Tom for his service as well, because, when you get someone from Tom's background, the political blue blood family from the West, and coming out to New Zealand, he's been such a tireless advocate. I've run into him in the main street of Gore. He's, I don't know what US Gore relationship looks like, but I presume it's now very good. Export of country music, Kaylee Val would be great. It's been, he's done an absolutely fantastic job. And to have someone of his standing and his connection into the last Biden administration, all the support that he's offered us, and also in the Pacific as well, he's done an exceptionally good job. So I want to see him in person, one-on-one before he goes, but to thank him personally. But I hope all of us in the room can appreciate, for folk that have been in the US system, to come out to New Zealand and hit it with the enthusiasm and the passion that he has with a view of wanting to enhance this relationship. It's pretty special.
Thank you. If we could thank the Prime Minister, please. Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, would you? Yeah.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to thank Fran, New Zealand Inc., and the Auckland Business Chamber for inviting me to participate in today's program. It's an honor to join Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, Minister for Trade Todd McClay, and other esteemed leaders of the New Zealand government and business communities in today's events. I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect on our country's strong partnership and the recent U.S. presidential election results. On November 5th, 2024, the American people made their voices heard in the presidential election and re-elected Donald Trump to become the 47th President of the United States. The election's clear outcome demonstrates a commitment to democracy and civil engagement that remains strong in the United States. We are proud of our open and transparent election process. We saw an unprecedented voter turnout, reflecting the importance of participation in our democratic process. A fundamental principle of American democracy is we accept the results, and the Biden-Harris administration has committed to a peaceful transfer of power in January. Looking down the road, we will continue to work hard advancing the United States-New Zealand relationship, which is the strongest it has been in decades. We hold a deep and long-standing commitment to democratic institutions, the rules-based international order, and respect for international rule of law. In defense of these values, we've worked together to counter threats to the international order, including Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the Houthis' attacks on shipping lanes in the Red Sea, and the PRC's destabilizing and aggressive behaviors in the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea, and elsewhere. One of our paramount shared interests is in advancing broad and inclusive prosperity in our own countries and throughout the world. To that end, we've made progress implementing the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. Through this agreement, the United States and New Zealand are upholding our values by promoting worker rights, increasing our capacity to prevent and respond to supply chain disruptions, and strengthening our collaboration on the transition to clean economies. Our strong trade and investment links also highlight how our economies are complementary. U.S.-New Zealand trade is better than ever. Two-way trade is now valued at more than 27 billion New Zealand dollars. The United States also recently surpassed Australia to become New Zealand's second largest export market. The growth in exports to the United States was led by a strong service sector, especially tourism, up more than 20% from last year to 7.5 billion New Zealand dollars. U.S. travel to New Zealand has surpassed pre-COVID levels. It's at 112%. Our nations share a united and enduring stake in an open, free, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Whether supporting the centrality of the Pacific Islands Forum, funding the Pacific Resilience Fund to fortify climate-resilient infrastructure, or coordinating development assistance to promote digital connectivity and marine science research, our nations share deep ties and commitments to the Pacific Islands. We continue to partner with New Zealand to advance rules and norms that will help our countries harness the benefits of emerging technology, including AI. We brought together governments from around the world to sign a political declaration on the responsible military use of AI and autonomy. We are also proud to have established new bilateral dialogues with New Zealand, including our space dialogue, which met for the first time in March, and the high-level critical and emerging tech dialogue, which convened this past August. We will seek to continue to expand mutually beneficial trade and knowledge sharing in areas like quantum computing, AI, biotech, and aerospace, which constitute some of the fastest growing parts of New Zealand's economy. And with new investments in infrastructure and geographic and regulatory advantages, it is no surprise U.S. aerospace companies have operations in New Zealand. Looking back and reflecting on how far we've come over the past 3 years, I have no doubt that the U.S.-New Zealand relationship will remain strong. While I cannot speculate on the specifics of the next administration's future policies, I can say that our shared values, interests, and view of the world, which forms the basis of our strong relationship, will remain unchanged. Let us continue to strengthen our friendship and partnership as we face the future together. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to close it?
I just talking to Fran before, I was just saying, in Tom's remarks there, some fantastic remarks, and I think he sums up the relationship incredibly well. But he also raised a point there about California and Colorado. And I just would say to all of you in the room, just, when you think about California, the fifth biggest country, if it was its own country, I think we've got 35% of all of our activity going in and out of the West Coast. I spent 2.5 hours, I think, with Gavin Newsom as I came through the US in July. We went to Giants Field and we actually hit some baseballs together, which was great. But actually, we had a really good conversation about how can we work together on like carbon capture, some of the geothermal technologies, and we really. So there's all I'm trying to say is whether it's Colorado or whether it's California, think about things through the lens of the states as much as through the nation state of the US. Think about it with respect to the consumer segments. Think about it in how you can chop it up in lots of different ways to build out business as you go forward. But we will continue to build and deepen relationships at the state level as much as at the federal level and across all sides of the aisle and at all levels of the government. But I thought it was just a good point for us to be remembering that we are doing a New Zealand free trade deal with Costco or Walmart, doing arrangements and formalising arrangements with states and governors and thinking about different areas we want to build out our business in is equally valuable as well. So again, thanks for the time. World of opportunity. Let's go out there and smack it, get into a positive growth mindset and go make things happen because we have a great future, but we've got to go make it happen for ourselves. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.